Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight. I'm Brandis Friedman.
And I'm Paris Schutz. On the show tonight,
Alderman Irvin.
In the flesh.
Alderman Irvin is present.
Quite a sight there. City Council resumes in-person meetings and passes affordable housing rules aimed at curbing displacement.
I called on him to resign. He's obviously not done that.
A blunt Mayor Lightfoot on the latest bombshell in the prosecution of Alderman Ed Burke. That and more in our Spotlight Politics.
One cop getting convicted is not justice for George Floyd.
Community activists reflect on Derek Chauvin's guilty verdict and what it could mean for policing in Chicago.
The connections between Chicago's gangs and gun violence and what can be done to help young people access other options.
There is no trust in this process.
People of color trying to get into the legal cannabis industry are still shut out. Could a new bill break the logjam?
You can't hear many speeches made by Chicago's first black mayor, but a new online archive makes Harold Washington's speeches available to read. We have the details.
The tactile-friendly details. We use very, very soft fabric.
And a local designer inspired by her daughter's sensory processing disorder creates a specially designed clothing brand. But first, some of today's top stories. New details in the sweeping federal corruption case against 14th Ward Alderman Ed Burke. The U.S. Attorney's Office released a 227-page document today in response to pretrial motions made by the Burke legal team. In it, the government goes in depth on the charges against the alderman, centered around allegedly using his powerful position in city council to try and steer business to his tax appeal law firm. In one notable passage, Burke is allegedly caught on a wiretap recording making anti-Semitic statements in talking about trading city favors for personal business. Quote, "Well, you know as well as I do, Jews are Jews, and they'll deal with Jews to the exclusion of everybody else unless there's a reason for them to use a Christian." This comes as Burke and other aldermen met for an in-person city council meeting for the first time in more than a year. We'll have more on that meeting and today's document coming right up. And public health officials report more than 2,700 new cases of the coronavirus since yesterday, with 28 additional deaths. That makes for a total of more than 1.3 million cases since the pandemic began, with 21,722 deaths. The 7-day test positivity rate now dropped to 3.8%, and the state reports more than 140,000 vaccine doses in the last 24 hours as well. The push for a Chicago Police Civilian Oversight Board got some star power today. Demonstrators took to the streets before this morning's City Council meeting to march in favor of community-driven proposals circulating in City Council. They got a boost from actor Danny Glover, who urged community members to continue to organize until the ordinance is passed.
And the work that you do, every single one of you do, as we stand out here in the cold, is essential to making this city what is possible to be, what it can possibly be. The city for the people. The city for the people.
And more on efforts at police oversight in just a moment. And how about that City Council meeting? After a year of meeting remotely, 28 aldermen gathered in the City Council chambers today, joined by the rest of their colleagues via Zoom. WTTW News reporter Heather Sharon was there too and joins us now. Heather, you were in the press room earlier today. Must have felt good to be back there. What was the mood at City Council like?
Well, Mayor Lori Lightfoot said it was a little bit like the first day of school. And at one point, there was such a buzz in the chamber from aldermen greeting one another with hugs and kisses and handshakes and fist bump that she had to admonish them to be a little quieter so the city council could continue to conduct its business. Now, it was very different. As you said, there were only 28 aldermen there in person. 22 aldermen logged in and participated in the meeting remotely via Zoom, as we have all done during this pandemic. There were also really strict social distancing protocols for the aldermanic seats. Not that they followed them, because I think everybody was really glad to see them. Everybody wore masks, and it was a little bit bumpy at times as aldermen who were remote or in person tried to be here, but be heard. But it's certainly a step forward. And Alderman Nicholas Sposato, I think, said it best, saying that it was sort of the first step towards signaling that Chicago is ready to reopen, at least a little bit. One
of the aldermen in attendance was Ed Burke, who might have second-guessed that decision once that federal document came out. And now to the substance of what they did there, Heather. They passed an ordinance that supporters say will strengthen the city's affordable housing stock, although some say it's not going far enough. Take a look.
It's disappointing, again, that our real estate industry, our developers who again get their way in a time where we're so close to reach an agreement for the families of our communities, the communities most vulnerable and affected by this pandemic.
This is one significant tool in the toolbox that will help us. We have to do much more. We have to create more housing on the south and west side of the city of Chicago. But this ordinance before us today is going to create more affordable units in our city, allow people to live in their communities that they grew up in.
So what does this ordinance do specifically, Heather, and why were some like Alderman Sigcho Lopez opposed?
Well, Alderman Sigcho Lopez's big concern was that it does not do enough to help the poorest Chicagoans find a safe, nice place to live. He also wanted the ordinance to do more to create family-size units. So that means 2 bedrooms, 3 bedrooms, somewhere where a whole family can live comfortably. And this ordinance really doesn't address that issue, although it tries to by requiring some units to be at least 2-bedroom. Essentially, if you want to build a project that needs special permission from the city or a city subsidy, you're going to have to set aside about 20% of those units in most areas of the city, including areas of the city like Pilsen, which Alderman Sigcho Lopez represents, where people are being displaced, longtime residents are being displaced. You'll also have to set aside 20% of your units if you want to build in an area that has very little affordable housing. Someplace like the far northwest side, where there's very little of that kind of housing that the city has built over the last several decades. But there's still a lot to be done, as Alderman acknowledged today.
All right, on another issue, Heather, today, police oversight. There's a proposal circulating that's been circulating. It was 2 proposals merged into one for a civilian oversight board. The mayor said she's going to put forth a plan. She hasn't done it yet. Let's hear what she had to say in response to your question today.
Nothing's being done in secret. It's making sure that we are listening, that we are anticipating the full range of upsides and downsides, and we're not taking a vote, as was scheduled earlier this year, on something that basically had a bunch of TBD provisions in an ordinance. That's not the way we get things done.
So, Heather, when is she going to put forth her ordinance, and what would be in it?
She says she'll put it out when she's ready, and she didn't answer my question when I asked her what the hangups were. But we've been waiting for September, and as you saw outside City Council today, people are getting antsy.
Well, some things going back to normal, getting back into in-person and not answering reporters' questions. All right, Heather Sharon, we'll see you in a bit for Spotlight. And now we go to Brandis Friedman with more on police oversight. Brandis.
Paris, police reform activists say yesterday's guilty verdict in the trial of former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin was a moment of relief and catharsis almost a year after the killing of George Floyd. But many say it is just the tip of the iceberg for police accountability. In Chicago, some are calling for new limits to the police department's foot pursuit policy after an officer shot and killed 13-year-old Adam Toledo last month. And a coalition of groups are pushing an ordinance that would establish civilian oversight of the CPD. Joining us with more are Arewa Karen Winters of the group Justice for Families. She also co-chairs a community working group assembled last summer to examine CPD's use of force policies. Jasmine Salas, co-chair of the Chicago Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression. And Eric Wilkins, an organizer with Communities United, which was involved in establishing the federal consent decree overseeing CPD. Now, we did invite the Chicago Police Department to join this conversation, but did not immediately hear back on our request. Arewa Karen Winters, let's start with you, please. What was your reaction to yesterday's verdict out of Minneapolis?
It's almost undescribable, but I was very overjoyed. I mean, my heart sang because so often we have very similar circumstances, but not the same outcomes. And so it was a victory for the people. And justice did, you know, I say truth prevails, but that doesn't always mean that justice prevails along with it. And yesterday, justice prevails. And I am so grateful for that.
Eric, you've worked on police reforms here in Chicago for years. What did the verdict mean to you?
Yeah, I agree with Araya that it felt good. It felt good to see it, but knowing that there's so much more work that has to be done here in Chicago, where Blue Lives Matter is a little bit different than Minnesota, you know. So I think we're gonna have a harder task on making it right.
In what way do you think it's harder here in Chicago?
I mean, the code of silence is been done for years. You know, the John Burge era. You know, my big brother was a part of the John Burge era. He did 25 years. You know, it's a code that they live by. You know, and my family witnessed it firsthand.
Jasmine, your group is pushing for the Empowering Communities for Public Safety Plan, or ECPS, which would establish civilian oversight of CPD. What exactly would that do?
ECPS would give the communities in Chicago a say in who controls our police accountability system. Currently, all of the key positions like the COPA administrator, as well as the superintendent of police, are appointed by the mayor. And we feel like people in the community should have a decisive voice over who's leading the system, as well as over police policy. And ECPS would put a binding referendum on the ballot in 2022 for voters who want more democratic control over the Chicago Police Department, including funding as well as appointing other positions.
Arewa Karen Winters, what specific reforms could the Chauvin trial lead to here in Chicago?
Well, you know, I'm glad that Eric lifted up about our code of silence, because what we saw in Minnesota was the police department came out and they said that, you know, it wasn't their training, that, well, some aspects of it were their training, but that he did use excessive force. I've never seen that, you know, happen here in Chicago, where police officers come out and speak against, you know, fellow police officers. But, you know, we're talking about Chicago is one of the oldest modern policing systems in the world. And so it's a very antiquated system. And we understand that the origins of it, you know, derive from, you know, slave patrol, slave catchers. So you can't separate a thing from its origin or its history. So until, and we know they didn't like dismantle that system, that some parts of our current system still operate in that racist framework that was not to serve nor protect people nor to keep people safe. It was to dehumanize people, to enslave people, and to harm people. And so I don't care how many Black officers they hire, brown officers they hire, women officers they hire, until, you know, that is done away with completely and totally. This is going to be our forever fight. We're going to continue to be in these predicaments. And the other thing is, they don't share power with community voices. They will not share power with us. And so we're between a rock and a hard place here in our city.
Now, Mayor Lightfoot said that she is working to draft her own police oversight bill, but it has yet to be introduced in City Council. Here's what she said today.
We're talking about the most consequential change in policing maybe ever in Chicago. There's a lot of conversations that need to be had. Those conversations are happening. They may not be visible to folks, but I think we're getting close to being ready to provide an alternative proposal for consideration of the City Council.
Jasmine, do you think parts or any of the mayor's proposal would satisfy parts of your own?
No, not at all. I think Lori Lightfoot has shown herself to stand with the police. She has defended crooked cops and defended their behavior as they have brutalized protesters like they did last summer. And so I don't trust her to make our police accountability system more democratic. And the fact that she scolded Alderman Byron Cicho Lopez today on the City Council floor shows that she is completely opposed to any kind of police accountability that gives the community a decisive say in CPD policies, and that's not right.
Eric, do you think civilian oversight of CPD would lead to meaningful changes in how the department polices Black and brown communities in particular?
Yes, I believe it would, but with this systemic racism that goes on, they can't allow it to happen. You know, I talk with guys who are our officers and who are not in the community that they should be in. You know, when you first think about officers, you want somebody that look like you. In Roseland, none of the officers, majority of the officers don't look like us. You know, so if you don't, how can you change something if you don't come in friendly to change? You know, they're overseers. They're not officers, they're overseers. They ask questions and expect answers. You know, and we would talk younger to just answer them and let them do it, because they're gonna do what they wanna do anyway. You know, having smaller children and having two young Black males, 9 and 5 years old, you know, it's kind of scary. Because it's...
So, sorry, I was just going to ask Arewa. So you're the co-chair of CPD's Use of Force Community Group. Last time you spoke with us, the department accepted only 5 out of more than 150 recommendations made by the group. Have you made any more progress in recent months?
Well, we are still, you know, at that time, like I said, we weren't in negotiations, but we are in negotiations. And it is not because of the police department. It is because the independent monitor, Maggie Hickey, strongly suggested that we stay in conversations about, you know, some of the recommendations that we were making. So we haven't received a full summary yet as to, you know, where we have actually landed. But the next topic is foot pursuits. And I just want to say that the coalition who works within the consent decree, we gave a draft in 2019 or October 2019. But unfortunately, you know, our mayor has not, you know, met with us to speak with us for some dialogue and engagement. And so it went unheard. And I said, maybe had that conversation started in 2017 when we strongly suggested that they have a foot pursuit policy in place. Maybe we could have avoided, you know, Adam Toledo and Mark Navarez and Anthony Alvarez, but it did not happen because, again, they're not listening to the people. So here we are.
Here we are, and that's where we'll have to leave it. My thanks to our guests, Arewa Karen Winters, Eric Wilkins, and Jasmine Salas.
Thank you.
And there's more news ahead, including a look at the current state of gangs in Chicago. But first, former real estate agent Dina Lewis moved from New York City to Chicago in 2018. Soon after, she decided to pursue a professional endeavor that was personal to her, designing clothing for kids with special sensory needs. Chicago Tonight's Evan Garcia visited the design studio of Minor Details clothing brand to learn more.
9-year-old Hannah Lewis lives with sensory processing disorder, a condition that can affect how the brain processes stimuli or things you feel through senses like touch, sight, and sound. Hannah's mom, Dina Lewis, says she noticed changes in her daughter around age 3.
She couldn't handle loud sound. She couldn't handle bright lights. And clothing became a challenge, to say the least. I mean, we had meltdowns every morning. Transitioning into any season that involved sleeves became agonizing. And I quickly realized that she just did not like the feeling of clothing against her skin.
While looking for clothing to fit Hannah's needs, Dina didn't find anything very inspiring.
The options for sensory-friendly clothing were horrific. So a lot of solids, just very basic. And so as she got older, I really wanted to create something that was more fun and more stylish, that she would want to wear.
So in 2019, with the help of designer Lauren Markt, Dina launched Minor Details, a stylish line of clothing designed to give comfort to kids with different sensory needs.
When you've got sensory processing issues, for some kids, they want more sensory input. They want to feel things more. They want tighter clothes. They want their clothes to feel like a little hug against their skin. Other kids want less sensory input. They want clothes that are loose, that don't touch their skin. We created these, which is a little Bermuda short. Very drop crotch, very, very soft fabrics. We did all of our seams, our serge seams, so they're actually very sort of low impact against the skin. They don't really create much friction. We did not, actually I'll show you here, we did not do any tags on the clothing.
Like some adults that find weighted blankets therapeutic, this jacket is specially designed for weights.
And then when you open it, you've actually find small pockets all throughout the jacket. These can accommodate weights for kids who use weighted clothing. I say they can also accommodate raisins for kids who don't. So whatever you want.
At the Delicious Design League, a creative studio where kids make graphics for minor details, Hannah proudly promotes her mother's brand.
So what I like about the clothes is how comfortable they are and how it solved my sensory processing disorder.
Occupational therapist Karen Differ says for some children, comfortable clothing can make a big difference.
So many of the kids that I work with in my practice are just really sensitive individuals. What that might mean is that they have a really hard time just being happy, functional kids when their clothes feel too scratchy or too itchy.
For now, people can find minor details threads online, and in future lines, Dina plans to make her clothing even more inclusive.
I really want to, for children who have braces, for children who have ports that they need to accommodate, to really bring this clothing to a point where it can really serve as many kids as need it.
For Chicago Tonight, I'm Evan Garcia.
There are differing opinions on sensory processing disorder within the medical community. Some doctors believe it's a standalone condition, while others think it's a symptom of disorders like autism. And some believe certain children are just hypersensitive to stimuli. And Minor Details is not just for kids, it also has an adult line of comfortable clothing. You can visit our website to learn more. The Illinois legislature has just over a month left in its annual spring session. On the docket, a fix for how the state awards licenses to operate in the legal cannabis business. Consumers may not notice it, but the licensing process has been plagued with issues. Amanda Vinicky joins us now with more. Amanda.
Yeah, Brandis, it has been legal in Illinois for adults to smoke, eat, or otherwise use pot for nearly a year and a half, and it has proven popular from the onset. Lines that you should see on screen, they are from day 2 of recreational marijuana being legal. Now, yesterday was the unofficial holiday for pot, 420. I did drive by a dispensary downtown, and while it was nowhere near this winding long line, I did see a socially distanced queue outside. The problem, really the holdup, lies, however, in Illinois' promises of expanding the pool of business owners who are able to make a profit from those sales.
We let the people down, and I apologize that people have been waiting, and they've used a lot of their life savings to become a business owner in Illinois to only be delayed.
Here is the heart of that letdown. Illinois limits how many shops can sell pot. They have to be licensed. And right now, that is a space monopolized. All of the dispensary owners, white men. When the state moved from medical marijuana to allowing recreational use, Governor J.B. Pritzker and other backers promised with great fanfare that they would use the legalization of pot to repair harms caused to those most targeted and most harmed by the war on drugs. A war that sent a disproportionate number of people of color to prison for drug crimes. But all this time, a year and a half later, it hasn't happened. Toy Hutchinson is the governor's top advisor on cannabis issues.
We've had some hiccups. It's been extremely challenging to try to dismantle what's so incredibly, for lack of a better term, baked into the system. But I do believe that when this is all done, we're going to have the most diverse ownership in the country. We just have to get through, the difficulties of getting this off the ground and getting through litigation and passing legislation and fixing and tweaking.
Now, those hiccups have Deborah Dillon frustrated. Her name is on 11 of the more than 4,500 applications that were sent in to the state of Illinois to get one of only 75 lucrative social equity cannabis dispensary licenses. None of her applications were among the 21 to get perfect scores eligible for a lottery.
This whole debacle is to the benefit of the incumbents and to the politically connected and to and to the wealthy. There's no effort, no real effort for social equity at all.
Dillon's scores, by the way, came close, just not a perfect score that those 21 folks who made it to the lottery did receive. Now, they still haven't gotten licenses either. The 75 licenses were supposed to have been awarded last May, as in 2020, and instead none have. First, there were delays that the state blamed on COVID. Then there were concerns about how the applications were scored. Illinois reports at least 6 lawsuits currently going that are tying things up. Now, applicants, including Dillon, did get the chance to correct any so-called deficiencies in their applications, but that still hasn't resulted in finalists. And she says that's a quagmire too.
Yes, and the second deficiency notice was like picking fly feces from pepper. It was so difficult.
Flies feces from pepper, she laughs, but this is high stakes. It is big money, and Dillon doesn't understand what's taking the state so long.
How hard can it be? Put all of the qualified applicants who score 90% or above, okay, into a bowl. You've gone through these deficiency notices. You know who they are. Why don't we do something fair for a change? You know, wouldn't that help the governor? Would that not restore faith in the process and in him if he had a fair lottery?
That now enter Representative Ford. He has a new bill that aims to get things on track.
We're going to make sure that people that should be in that lottery have a true opportunity. And who are those people? People that were hardest hit by the war on drugs, who the law was intended for. And so I think that we are in good shape to make sure that this monopoly of the cannabis industry ends in Illinois. And it will be diverse as a result of the law that we pass coming up.
That proposal comes after months, really, probably nearly a year of negotiations, including with the Pritzker administration. And Hutchinson says the governor is committed to getting those social equity licenses issued this year.
What we have to do now is to make sure that there are people who are able to achieve that these very first equity licenses that'll go out anywhere, really. So I can't wait for that day. And I know that the applicants who've been waiting and believing and dreaming this entire time can't wait for that day either. And we're gonna get there.
But Dillon is skeptical. She says she has no trust in the process, no trust in elected officials, and she doesn't like Ford's proposal. We could see more negotiations before the spring session adjourns the end of May. Brandis, back to you.
As always, Amanda, thank you. And now, Paris, back to you.
All right, thanks, Brandis. And still to come on Chicago Tonight, the connections between Chicago's gang and gun violence and what can be done to give young people other options.
I just think there's no place in public life for somebody like him.
Mayor Lightfoot reacts to the latest bombshell in the prosecution of Alderman Ed Burke. That and much more in our Spotlight Politics. And a new online archive features scripts of speeches made by Chicago's first black mayor, Harold Washington. We have all the details. But first, some more of today's top stories. Chicago Public School students will be back in the classroom 5 days a week next school year under a budget proposal from the school district today. It also accounts for a drop in enrollment because of the pandemic.
We made a $32 million investment to offset enrollment, okay? So going back to that issue, we knew that schools enrollment, that this is an aberration this year. In a lot of cases, the numbers dipped dramatically, but we expect some bounce back.
The district says 94% of schools will see increases in their fiscal year 2022 budgets, and 80% of schools will receive equity grants to offset enrollment losses. In addition to 5-day schooling, the district says it still intends to offer a remote learning option for students who are unable to return. In a statement, the Chicago Teachers Union says its staff would also like to return to full-time in-person learning in the fall, but that conditions of the return must be negotiated with the union. The CTA is unveiling its latest train car model. The new-look CTA 7000 series will make its debut on the Blue Line between Forest Park and O'Hare as part of a trial run. The new car features an updated seating configuration as well as LED lights and an upgraded suspension for a smoother ride. The CTA says some of the features were put in after customers suggested them in various surveys. At least 2 Chicago colleges will require students to get the COVID-19 vaccine before returning to campus next fall. Both Columbia College and DePaul University announced the move today. The schools also say they'll provide vaccine clinics for students and faculty. They become the first Chicago schools to require the vaccine after other U.S. universities like Notre Dame made similar announcements. Just what is the role of gangs in Chicago's violence problem? A spate of shootings of young people in recent weeks has put a renewed spotlight on the issue. The city has had gangs as long as it has been incorporated, but the structures have evolved over the years, leaving a more fractured and perhaps a more violent system than ever before. And joining us are Jervon Hicks, a former gang member who spent time in prison. He is now a life coach at the Youth Peace Center of Roseland. Miguel Cambray, Director of Strategic Partnerships and Initiatives for Ready Chicago at Heartland Alliance, and Benneth Lee, also a former Chicago gang member who spent 15 years in Illinois prisons. He is now an instructor in criminal justice studies at Northeastern Illinois University and co-founder of the National Alliance for the Empowerment of the Formerly Incarcerated. We did invite the Chicago Police Department to send a representative to join us tonight, but they declined. We do appreciate all of you being here. Welcome to Chicago tonight.
Thanks for having me.
All right, I'll start with you, Jervon. So help me understand the allure of gangs in Chicago for so much of the city's youth.
I just know off top, social media plays a large role, a big part of the influence. I don't necessarily call them gangs because there's really no structure. They're more like cliques, factions, and just groups just like radicals. So we just try and engage those guys. We deal with hot spots. High crime areas, key individuals, just try and get them to buy into the system by building relationships and building a bond and showing them something different by providing them services that can help them become better men as they grow within the community.
And Jervon, back in the day, can you describe what drew you into that kind of life?
I think I was more intrigued by, to be honest, it was a Duke Blue Devil jacket that had a pitchfork on it, and I kind of levitated to that. And then I was just really interested in the laws and policies. So I was really more into teaching guys how to be better at what we were as part of an organization. But and then I just found myself having a love for guns, and I started getting myself in a lot of trouble. And that's what landed me here today.
And we'll talk about that in a moment. Benneth, you heard Jervon talk about how gangs have changed. There's no real form or structure. What is this structure right now compared to what it was 10, 20, 30 years ago?
Well, you got some guys that honor the nation they part of, like the Vice Lord Nation, the Disciple Nation, Stone Nation. You got some guys claim those names, but they don't honor the nation itself. And that's where the breakdown at, like Jervon was saying, since they done broke down that hierarchy and put them now not in state prisons, but took groups of these so-called heads of organizations, put them in the federal system to break down communication and the ability to communicate. So now you got a lot of cliques, because like I said, you got some guys that might be vice lords, but they don't honor the vice lord nation. They renegade. And then you might see a clique of guys on one block, but it might be 5 vice lords, 2 disciples, and 1 stone, and they're getting money together and they're hustling. And that's how they're moving now. So it's kind of hard to say this is a street gang specifically that did this act, you know.
So with prosecution in RICO cases, it's kind of broken down into more scattered system, more anarchic system. Miguel Cambry, when you counsel young kids, how much of the violence that you see, the trauma that you see, is a result of gang-related activity versus just simple interpersonal conflict?
So just to be clear, Ready Chicago provides cognitive behavioral therapy and group sessions for individuals. And the idea of the cognitive behavioral therapy is to disrupt impulsive behavior. So I think when we're interacting in terms of our participants and the communities that we serve, we think about the impact of sense of community and the community's disinvestment. So criminal opportunity is sort of a derivative of that, from the disinvestment that we have lived for hundreds of years in our spaces. So I don't know, to the two gentlemen's point on sort of the deconstruction of gangs today and back then. I think a lot has changed from back then. I mean, at one point we were party crews and then we were picked up by a fraction, right? Or they were sort of just neighborhood corners specifically that represented sports alliances that turned into bigger fractions. So I agree that there's been sort of a change in the evolution of the way that folks affiliate or associate. But again, in terms of the recklessness that you asked earlier, it's a continuation of our environment and our environment impact on us and our resilience to survive and to be relevant in our communities.
And speaking of survival, a big part of that is guns. Jervon, you were talking about how you became really drawn to guns. I've heard you say that you were addicted to guns at what point. Can you just talk about that addiction and why guns are just so prevalent?
Even when I began carrying firearms, I just know it was a power move. I don't think there's nothing to be held in your hand that's more powerful than a firearm, unless you have a large bank account, a large load of money. However, the addiction came from seeing fear in others' eyes. Did I know I was doing wrong? Absolutely. Did I know it was illegal? Absolutely. But the thing of getting caught was far from my mind. And just like right now, today they running around here with 50-round drums and 100-round clips and switches and things that's like futuristic, right? And so that's more intriguing to them. And like I told you earlier, it's more like, you know, we have a vaccine for COVID. I'm trying to find a vaccine for a trigger finger, something that I can inject in that finger to make them stop using it. And until then, I'm not going to stop until we figure out something else to add to the tool belt besides a weapon.
And Bennett, you know, kids at a young age can be drawn into this, and even if someone offers them an alternative or says stay in school, get good grades, or come to my peace circle, that allure is still very powerful. So how do you combat that for young people?
Well, most young people, they get drawn into what's happening in the community. You know, the average high school a young brother in Chicago goes to is outside his neighborhood. So he might meet some friends at that high school that might be plugged with a certain set. And they become friends, and then all of a sudden he claiming that set. Or he just might be in an area where it's a prevalent street organization there. And because he lived there, now he's labeled as that. And so it's like, I can't beat him joint, he get pulled into it. So I think what really need to happen, we need to get on these blocks, in these communities, build relationships, you know, get them to like talk to each other. Because if I got a relationship with Javon, it'd be hard for me to shoot Javon. Right? If me and Javon got a relationship and he got buddies, I got buddies, I might be talking crazy about doing something to him. One of his own guys can tell me, say, man, you need to sneeze with that, man. Let me holler at you. You know, but those relationships got to happen. That's what the work we do in nonviolence, getting on these blocks and help build relationships, get brothers to look at things a little different. You know,
So when you get folks together in a room that might be part of different cliques, have you seen the tensions diffuse?
Yeah, I mean, I'm from the Austin area. You know, we had a situation where there was two guys two groups was at it. We brought them face to face, see what they all had in common. They came to an agreement, and then one brought up the fact you need to get this other group in here because that's their allies, and then we got them in. The next, you know, we had 9 little cliques together talking. In the beginning, yeah, they came strapped up with their pistols, but after maybe the 3rd or 4th meeting, you didn't see that anymore. You didn't see the security there. They was asking each other for a short on a cigarette afterwards. It's just building those relationships. And then incidents might happen in the community right today. They'll call each other. Let's investigate that before we react to it. And that's because we done set up a safe environment for them to have that dialogue and look at all these variables that lead to tension.
Interfacing seems to be so important. Miguel Cambre, what about the work that your organization does on an individual level, cognitive behavioral level? How do you reach some of these youth?
Well, similar to Benny, I mean, with some of our sites, we have been able to engage over 700 individuals throughout 4 neighborhoods in the city of Chicago. And in one of our sites, we have about 12 mobs, right? 12 cliques in one site. So we work to build, similar to Benny's point, build a sense of community, a sense of purpose, and a sense of self-worth. And that happens through relational building and intentional building, and that happens over a duration of time. Obviously, a lot of folks carry guns for a sense of safety or a sense of perpetration, but building a sense of hope and a sense of community helps sort of de-escalate that tension that you're referring to. And we start to see one another as humans, right? And the trauma behind our violence and the self-hate, you know, from one to another that sort of that's been built in us over the years.
Such important work to be done out there, and such important work that you're doing. And we thank you all for sharing your views here. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having me.
And up next, our Spotlight Politics team dives into the latest bombshell in the prosecution of Alderman Burke and much more.
Don't ever miss Chicago Tonight. Subscribe to our podcast. Get a daily download of our show delivered to your desktop or mobile device. Go to WTTW.com/Chicago Tonight Podcast and subscribe.
Prosecutors accuse Alderman Ed Burke of anti-Semitism in their latest court filings in his criminal case. The focus of our Spotlight Politics as more details emerge on those secret tapings of the alderman. Welcome back, the Spotlight Politics team, Amanda Vinicky, Heather Sharon, and Paris Schutt. So as we just heard, federal prosecutors dropped a bombshell in its newest court filing in the corruption case against Alderman Ed Burke. According to prosecutors, Burke allegedly made anti-Semitic remarks on secret recordings saying, quote, "Well, you know as well as I do, Jews are Jews and they'll deal with Jews to the exclusion of everybody else unless there's a reason for them to use a Christian." Paris, prosecutors argued that this incendiary information was relevant to the charged scheme. Why?
Well, first I should say that anyone who's covered Ed Burke all the way back to the council war days would not be surprised that that kind of language was allegedly captured here. But prosecutors say this conversation is central to many of the charges outlined in this case because he's trying allegedly to get business for his private property tax appeal firm. And in exchange, he's saying, well, you know, I got to do something for these guys. And what I'll do is something in relation to my capacity as the finance committee chairman and city council. I'll give them some city-related business so I can get private business. This is what most of these counts are about in this case. And I don't think it's lost on prosecutors that this kind of revelation gets played in the media, gets played in the public. This is the kind of thing that draws attention. And so ultimately, it could be the kind of thing that the defense attorneys say isn't relevant. It paints too harsh of a picture here for what we're focusing on in this case. They might be successful at that, but the damage is done here in the public domain, and those comments were picked up by everybody.
And Amanda, Burke's lawyers tried to block that from becoming public, right?
Well, yeah, they're trying to block a lot of the wiretapped conversations, frankly. And by the way, there is an extraordinary amount of those conversations the feds overheard. But in particular, because as Paris sort of was alluding to, I think they recognized the damage that could be done to Burke's character. You had prosecutors saying, you know, that this isn't too prejudicial. And by the way, they do say that it is relevant to what is at hand, while Burke is saying on all of those wiretaps, you do not hear the tit-for-tat exchange of a shakedown that ostensibly the feds would be looking for. You have prosecutors saying just the opposite. And I think really if you hone in, there's of course the attention-grabbing anti-Semitic slur component of that conversation. But where the trade comes in is, quote, use a Christian, at least allegedly. Burke, of course, denying any wrongdoing.
Now, Burke continues in his 50th year as alderman in spite of the objections of the mayor. Here's what Mayor Lori Lightfoot had to say today.
By his own words, in wiretapped conversations, Alderman Burke said and did things that not only were improper, it seemed to be illegal. Now, he is entitled to a presumption of innocence, as all charged defendants are, but I called on him to resign. He's obviously not done that. But I just think there's no place in public life for somebody like him.
Heather, is there any other way to remove an alderman other than, ballot box, jury box, or pine box?
That's it. There is no mechanism for impeachment or removal. I get that questions from people sometimes. Mayor Lightfoot also wasn't the only city elected official to call for Ed Burke to step down. I spoke with Alderman Michelle Smith, who is one of 2 Jewish members of the city council, who said that, of course, Ed Burke owes Chicago's Jewish community an apology, and that he should resign because she said, quote, he's a criminal, end quote. And, it would have been one day unthinkable for a member of the city council to speak out against Ed Burke that way. But this is a new era. And while he's been quieter at city council meetings, not quite so many, historical lectures about the founding of the city, he's still active. And Mayor Lightfoot said today that he's working through other aldermen to get his work done. So a lot of eyebrows went up when she said that.
Who could those be?
Well, so, there's been this redacted section of the court filing that seemed to reveal that Burke was caught on tape by another cooperator committing a separate crime. Paris, do you think that is former Alderman Danny Solis, or could this be someone else?
Well, let's pick a public official here that's been in some legal hot water. It could be somebody else, Brandis. Wouldn't we all like to know? I don't know the answer to that, but I will remind everybody that Danny Solis, the former chairman of the zoning committee, powerful alderman, is a big player in this indictment because he allegedly was wearing a wire that nabbed Burke. And to get out of his own legal trouble, I mean, you have the feds here basically setting him up to try to be the intermediary in the case of the remodel of the old post office building. He's kind of like the intermediary, goading them to get to hire Burke, and Burke's lawyers say, well, you're kind of using Danny Solis here to kind of like entrap our client, for lack of better phraseology here, and that's kind of one of the things they feel is kind of like illegitimate about the case being brought against them.
Now, of course, we have to talk about the Derek Chauvin verdict. Amanda, you covered the reaction to those guilty verdicts in the Derek Chauvin trial. What are elected officials saying?
Well, they are saying that this is justice, some saying that it wasn't justice, but at least it was accountability. Lots of condolences and sympathy for the Floyd family. I did not see any of the many reactions that came into my inbox. None expressed anything besides that sort of sentiment. There was nobody that was feeling remorseful for Chauvin or that expressed any sentiment that the jury had gotten it wrong. I even saw reporting, the leader of Chicago's FOP had said that Chauvin did not act properly. So there wasn't any sort of reaction. What I'm really focusing on is what this leads to, because of course, we did see already a very big reaction to the George Floyd, now we can phrase it as a murder, by the Illinois legislature, but going to really wait and see if this verdict and other actions are going to lead legislators to end qualified immunity for police officers, and that is something that police officers, law enforcement in general, are really fighting against.
And Heather, the DOJ, we know, is opening, or the Department of Justice, I should say, is opening an investigation into the Minneapolis policing. Chicago is under a federal consent decree. Is this helping with reforming CPD here?
Well, we've talked on this show quite a bit about how far behind the Chicago Police Department is on meeting the requirements of that consent decree. And I have to remind you that the Department of Justice did not force Chicago into a consent decree. It was former Illinois Attorney General Lisa Madigan who sort of put the screws to then former Mayor Rahm Emanuel to force this. Under the Trump administration, the Department of Justice refused to pursue consent decrees, even in egregious cases of police misconduct. So this is the first of a new era of the Department of Justice under Attorney General Merrick Garland. It will be interesting to me to watch and see what the Department of Justice does as Chicago continues to struggle to fulfill the terms of the consent decree it's under, as well in the wake of what happened, of course, to 13-year-old Adam Toledo and all of the other issues facing Chicago police.
And we just heard earlier in the show from some activists who are among a group who are putting the pressure on, and that pressure is mounting to determine what civilian police oversight will look like as Latinx aldermen and activists call for accountability. Led to a heated exchange between the mayor and Alderman Byron Sigcho Lopez when he took a turn from honoring 13-year-old Adam Toledo. Here's a look.
I will give you a brief moment to speak. Brief, sir.
Mayor Lightfoot, we have a bill right now, and you know this very well. We have the Empowerment Committee for Public Safety. We need to pass it.
Sir, you are now out of order.
I'm not
You are now out of order. You are out of order.
Now, Heather, you were back in City Council for the first time in a year. What was that like? But also, why did that moment become so heated?
Well, what happened was that Alderman Mike Rodriguez, whose 22nd ward includes Little Village, where Adam was killed, introduced a resolution honoring Adam, talking a little bit about who he was and what he liked, and basically calling for the city to make real changes in the wake of his death. That prompted Alderman Sigcho Lopez to stand up, and he was actually the only alderman who didn't have a seat on the City Council chambers floor. He had to sit in the gallery because of social distancing rules to stand up and push for that unity ordinance, as they're calling it, to put a civilian oversight board in charge of the police department. But as you heard, Mayor Lori Lightfoot wasn't having any of that.
Now, Amanda, we know, obviously we've got to pivot to COVID a little bit, and infection rates are down, but ICU beds are still filling up as officials are redoubling their efforts to be sure that residents on the South Side are vaccinated. But aren't all Chicagoans eligible, all Chicagoans over the age of 16, that is, eligible for a vaccination now?
Yes, and not just Chicago. This is everywhere. For a time, we really saw a lot of disparate policies between the city of Chicago, but also many of the suburban health departments. Now, statewide, adults can get the vaccine. And it does appear Cook County public health officials saying that they do expect to soon be putting out again and giving shots for that Johnson & Johnson shot, with a lot of people have been requesting. We also see the state doing college days, and we have a couple of universities in Chicago, I believe Columbia as well as DePaul, now requiring that vaccine to be given before students can return in the fall. But we knew at some point we were going to hit a period where there would be, for a long time, you didn't have enough vaccine to put into arms. It may soon be turning the corner to the challenge of convincing people who haven't yet received the vaccine to get it, to get to that point of herd immunity.
Now, Paris, in the 45 seconds that we've got left, there were these resignation rumors about the mayor. Are these a combined effort to put some pressure on her, just to rattle her?
Well, Brandis, it was so bizarre. It was a lot of rumors that just sort of flew off the handle on Twitter over the weekend, and it seemed to come from far-right sources that are opposed to the mayor, and then picked up by far-left sources that are opposed to the mayor, but no credible sources. And, and then some of the folks that started spreading these then took them back and said, hey, it didn't come from us. We should stop doing this. So, I mean, the lesson here is that just don't trust what you see on social media unless it's coming from a credible news outlet. I mean, everybody should know that, but we have to remind everybody of that sometimes.
All right. Like a credible news outlet like our Spotlight
ours.
Politics team, Heather Sharon, Amanda Vinicky, and Paris Schatz. Thanks, guys. Up next, a new online archive of speeches by Chicago's first black mayor in a conversation that originally aired on Sunday's Chicago Tonight Black Voices. But first, a look at the weather. There are few existing audio recordings of speeches made by Chicago's first black mayor, Harold Washington. But a new online archive by the Chicago Public Library hopes to fill the gap. WTTW News reporter Patty Wetley joins us now with more details about this digital collection. Patty, tell us, what exactly is in this archive and why is it significant?
Hi, Brandis. Yeah, as you mentioned, it's significant because for as important
Harold Washington was to the city of Chicago and how groundbreaking his election was, there are so few recordings of his speeches. So the Chicago Public Library has digitized original scripts. There's hundreds of them online for people to access. Everything from welcoming comments for dignitaries like Archbishop Desmond Tutu to budget addresses to commencement speeches. It's all there for people to read for free.
And remind us, what made Harold Washington's speeches so memorable?
Well, the archivists talk about how much warmth and humor and optimism there is in his speeches. And I think the important thing as well is that in the years since his death, we've heard so many people talk about Harold Washington and everything he wanted for the city of Chicago. When you read his speeches, Harold is telling the story, and he's giving you insights into his thought process, his strategy. It's a great way to hear from the man himself, really close to what would have been his 99th birthday just a couple of days ago. So it puts the words back in Harold's mouth, I think.
Yeah, good way to take a trip backwards into history a little bit and see the first Black mayor. Patty Whiteley, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Brandis.
And you can read Patty's full story on our website, where you can find a link to that online archive. It's all at WTTW.com/news. Back to wrap things up right after this. And that's our show for this Wednesday night. Don't forget to stay connected with us by signing up for our daily briefing. And you can get Chicago Tonight streamed on Facebook, YouTube, and our website, WTTW.com/news.
And Brandis, congratulations to you on your Studs Terkel Award. And you can also get the show via podcast and the PBS video app. And please join us tomorrow night live at 7. Chicago's greater Englewood area has among the lowest COVID vaccination rates. We check in on the distribution process as the next stop on our In Your Neighborhood series.
And the story behind the CTA's Bridge on Top of a Bridge in an all-new Ask Jeffrey. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Brandis Friedman.
And I'm Paris Schutz. Thank you so much for watching. Stay healthy and safe. Have a great night.
Closed captioning for this program is brought to you by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, dedicated to preserving the dignity and rights of all individuals.